All right. David Spang is the co-founder of Coastal Green Wellness, a premium hemp retailer with 5 locations across 2 states, as well as Nine Dot, a cannabis beverage brand that launched early last year. Based in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, David also has an entrepreneurial history that goes before his time with Coastal Green in 2017. So, David, thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the US of NA.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So, I know you and your wife, Crystal, first launched Coastal Green in 2017, and very much with a kind of wellness oriented focus. And the industry has certainly changed a lot in the last 8 years. We'll get into some of that. And you launched the Nine Dot beverage line, I believe early last year. So tell us about your journey so far, and what got you into this space in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, 2017 was when we opened our first retail store in my hometown of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So, long story short, I've always been a bit fascinated by the cannabis industry, a consumer myself for a long period of time. I remember 2014 going to my very first cannabis cup in Colorado, the first year it went recreationally legal. It was really cool to see that experience. Back in Myrtle Beach, I had started 2 other previous businesses, one a grocery delivery company, and then another a retail product. Had some moderate success with those, as any startup, though, facing its own set of challenges. Always knew I'd be involved in the cannabis industry to some extent. It's just where was my opportunity going to present itself? What was I going to move forward with? What was I going to capitalize on? In 2016, I started seeing some of the pilot programs for growing hemp in Colorado and a few other states. Then the 2017 update to the Farm Bill, which was a 1-year provisionary bill. It was signed into law in 2018. I saw federally the definition of hemp be changed from the non-flowering variety to any part of the cannabis plant with less than 0.3% delta 9 THC. So you had these strains of cannabis that would have been considered federally illegal be shifted to a federally legal definition. So saw that legislation change, those definition changes at the federal level. And then where the CBD market started to unfold was not ideal from my perspective. So we had one good local grower in our state who was doing a lot, kind of pioneering. But in terms of like a retail setting, there really was not a presence at all from the reputable side. No one dedicated retail wise just to CBD in South Carolina at that time. So that's when, against the advisement of friends, family, everyone's, you can't do that. That's not legal. What's the market going to be like that? What's the market? I chose to start a physical brick and mortar retail storefront under the name Coastal Green Wellness with a simple mission, which was to educate and normalize cannabis as medicine. We went very educationally based, cited proper literature, because when you really start digging into it, you realize there's actually a lot of peer-reviewed research and literature. We need more for sure, but definitely a good base layer. So yeah, we watched the CBD industry explode in mid 18 going into 2019, had a bit of a collapse, then kind of a resurgence. Now, we're here. The CBD market has really solidified itself as a nice, sustainable market throughout the U.S.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, we happen to live, I think, about 5 or 6 blocks from one of your stores here in Decatur, in Georgia. And, the first time I walked in there, I was kind of struck by, it really does feel like a wellness center. You come in the front door, it could be the front end of a yoga studio, or a spa. And, not here to disparage anybody else's retail businesses, but I will say, having gone into other retailers in other states and other places, it's all across the board. And some of those experiences can, I think, be lacking. And that can certainly, I think, turn off a certain segment of potential consumers. So I'd love to hear you talk about the intentionality of what that retail experience looks like and, where you would like to see the industry as a whole go with that, as obviously so many new consumers are now opening their eyes and being open to this category.
Yeah, appreciate the compliment. We worked really hard on making sure that our presentation across Coastal Green as a whole, but particularly the storefront, that initial presentation, that initial feeling that you get when you enter one of our stores is exactly what we want. And the real reason being is, I do split my time between Atlanta and my hometown still, Myrtle Beach. Atlanta is a lot more cannabis friendly, to say it lightly. Myrtle Beach, in South Carolina in general, not so much, or even you go outside of Atlanta, not so much in terms of the preconceived notion of cannabis. So when I was planning opening the very first store and looking at what our go-to-market plan should be, again taking with a grain of salt everyone's hesitation about CBD in mind, and it's not legal, it's this, to connection to the stereotypical stuff that you relate to cannabis. We really wanted to be the opposite of that. Not necessarily there's anything wrong with it, but we wanted to make sure that when consumers think of cannabis and marketplaces, they get the full picture, because cannabis, yes, can be X, Y, and Z, but it spreads across all demographics. So we wanted to make sure that the presentation was really clean, welcoming, calming, very clinical in a way, but still true to the cannabis plant. Because we're not quite clean cut doctor's office, but we are definitely a little bit more towards that end of things than need be. So yeah, that's how we got there.
Okay. So before we go into Nine Dot a little bit, let's talk about the regulatory side. So I know we've talked about this before. You've been very involved in that at the legislative level. We're going to go into kind of what's the craziness that's happening at the state level, including the state that I'm in. Although it looks like that's finally found a resolution. So can you share a little bit of background on that, and how did you get involved in all of those things?
Yeah, so I think we could probably spend the rest of this podcast talking about this one subject alone, because it's been a year for legislation for sure. But I'll give you a quick little background. So it's not even an avenue I thought or I sought to go down. It kind of fell in my lap. So what happened is, again, going back to South Carolina, it was January of last year, so January 2024. There was a lot of confusion from law enforcement. There was some uncertainty from different representatives in South Carolina, some statements that were made attacking of small businesses. And that was pretty upsetting for a lot of people. But the flip side of that was it really brought a lot of business owners together, and seeking out a way to, just like any other industry, you look at the alcohol industry, you look at, hospitality, food, you name whatever industry, they have their own set of associations that make sure that their voices and presence is heard at the state and federal levels. So shout out to American Healthy Alternatives Association. They are a national nonprofit with state chapters set up to fight for the rights of hemp companies throughout the U.S. They've had a lot of wins. They've really done a great job protecting the industry through many different states. And when things kind of hit the fan in South Carolina during that time frame, the business owners came together, and AHA was like, hey, we should looked at starting a chapter in South Carolina. I went to one of the fundraisers really with the intention of just supporting, but what I quickly found out was a big part of it is having the right presence, conversations, and image attached to the industry. And quickly found myself in the position of, hey, maybe I should actually play a role with SCHAA, South Carolina Healthy Alternatives Association, and be a part of these conversations and help champion for the industry in a different avenue than I have previously. And that had started me out on that avenue where it's been a year. It's been a lot. I learned a whole lot. Again, not something I was necessarily prepared for or knew too much about, but I kind of dove in head first and really hit the ground running. And we've made a lot of strides. It's been a great learning experience. And then also on the Georgia side of things, we don't have a state chapter in Georgia set up, but we do still play a role here. We are working with some of the other trade associations as well. And not exactly sure why it's come to such a crosshair. I mean, maybe because the THC side of our industry has exploded so much and gone so mainstream, particularly through the beverages. But a lot of states this year have had quite a bit of pushback from regulatory authorities. Whether you're looking at Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina is pretty safe, but Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, there's been a big push to put in regulations that potentially would choke the industry in a really negative manner. Now, we of course want regulation. We want to make sure consumers are safe. Any reputable business owner has already been implementing these policies like 21 plus, appropriate lab testing, appropriate labeling. But we do support putting the regulations in place to make that across the industry. But they usually tend to try and overstep and make it so most businesses would not be operational. So yeah, to speak, I think the second part of your question was if we jump into the Georgia side of things. Are you familiar with it, or how much are you? Where are you at?
We're familiar with it. I think our listeners are somewhat. We've been talking about it on some of the socials, and I know that at the end of as of we're recording this on March 31st. As of last week, I think the state legislature decided not to ban THC drinks, and in fact actually brought back in the liquor stores, which had been shut out of that, I think, in the last round. So pretty up to speed on that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, last year, Bill 494 was passed, which, we definitely pushed for that. We think it was a very appropriate bill. The 5-yard line, though, there was definitely some language added to our bill that was not great, which took away flower and THCA, unfortunately. But it did protect the rest of the industry. So although we didn't have the time to fight and lobby and get that portion of the industry back, it is what it is. We all kind of adjusted, made our investments into making sure we comply with all of these new regulations. Honestly, the Department of Agriculture in Georgia has been pretty great through this process. I mean, they're trying to rein in an industry that's been able to run wild. So, there's going to be some sacrifices and compromises that have to get made, but they've actually been pretty great to work with and keeping small businesses in mind, which has been great. Now, fast forward to this legislative session, and we had a couple of very bad bills that were submitted. Bill SB 33, which was a total THC ban, and then the Bill 254.
254, yep.
254. That's the more recent. That's the one that caught a lot of headlines, where they really just imposed more strict milligram caps and some other things. And then right before it left the Senate, they added language to ban beverages completely. No THC beverages at all. They were going to pose a 5 milligram cap, which it should be 10. 10 is reasonable. But they were going to pose a 5 milligram cap, and then suddenly the 5 milligram cap went to no THC beverages. And then also you look at Bill 33. Bill 33 would have been a total THC ban. So that's, the sum of all THC has to maintain under 0.3%, because that's when you get into Delta 8 and some other variants that aren't natural, normal THC. But that's a lot of the vape market, a lot of the higher dose edibles. Now, I do support having access to higher dose edibles because some consumers need them. There's a lot of science about liver enzymes and bioavailability and tolerance, and having options that meet every consumer's needs is definitely key while maintaining safety. But yeah, that transition for both those bills really caught us off guard. We thought in Georgia, hey, we finally have our bill. We've worked with the Department of Ag. It's great. Let's get these regulations underway, rein in the industry, and push forward. And then, just literally a couple of weeks later, you had both these bills submitted. And kind of caused chaos in the industry. Luckily, great support from the consumers and business owners in the state. Wrote a bunch of letters, emails. I watched all the hearings. Unfortunately, due to my schedule, I wasn't in Atlanta during the time. But it was very interesting to see, because the committee that it landed in front of, which I believe is the Regulated Industries Committee, if I recall correctly, they were actually fairly pro-hemp. Their statements were really fair. Their viewpoints were very fair. I appreciated everything. The committee, the chairman of the committee was very, very favorable to hemp for the most part, in a very reasonable way. So it was cool to see that. And then again, a complete 180 was Now I believe in Georgia, they call it substitute. They substituted all of that language essentially just to make it a bill that would allow liquor stores the right to apply for a hemp license. And I'll dive into that a little bit just for your viewers because people got a little confused. These products were in liquor stores. The drinks were already in liquor stores. But the unintended consequence of the bill that passed last year is now that hemp products were defined in the state level, it's a definable product. Liquor stores have a list of products they're allowed to sell. And now that it's defined, it is not on that list. They cannot sell it legally. So they got letters from the Department of Revenue, took it off shelf, and now they may be able to sell it. We'll see what happens. Into session's right around the corner. Is it going to actually pass? I don't know. It'd be great if it does. It was a big portion of the industry. It's really accessible. It makes sense. Liquor stores can sell it. They're already checking 21 plus. They have the infrastructure to do it. But this bill would allow them to apply for a license. Now they could potentially not even just sell the beverages. They can actually sell any consumable hemp product. The bill would allow them the right to apply for a hemp retailer's permit the same way I have mine for my stores. So they could actually sell any of the products that are Georgia regulated.
Yeah. Well, you're right in that we could probably devote an entire long
Oh, yeah.
podcast episode to just
We
this
could unpack that
regulatory.
a lot more, and
Yeah.
why we got here, who's supporting what legislators, what businesses. We could
Yeah.
talk for a bit, but I think the key takeaway is at the moment the hemp industry is fairly safe. I don't think that Bill 33 is going to pass. I don't think that we'll see if the new updated version of 254 is going to go through. But they are doing what is the term they called it? A dual panel. Dual research panel. I forget the exact term, but they're taking 10 Senate members and House members, and they are going to review research, talk to industry experts, and really dive into the safety and what the regulations should be over the summer. So we're going to keep paying attention to it, watch what happens, make our voices heard, and make sure that going into next session, if they do choose to pass new legislation, that it still promotes a healthy Georgia-based industry, because the hemp industry is not going anywhere. And that's one of the most frustrating parts when you get into these really strict regulations. All you do is push the business and the revenue coming in to out of your own state. That's literally all that it does. These products are not going to be stopped consuming. People know about them. E-commerce, they can go across the border. The products are not going to stop. So these strict regulations just simply push the business out of Georgia, which we don't want. We want to keep it in Georgia-based business hands.
Oh, absolutely. So last question on this side before we go back into your products. Is there a little bit of a silver lining to all this activity? I mean, there's the legalized recreational marijuana side versus the hemp derived side, which have been on opposite sides, I think, in several states, including Florida, which I know you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
So, overall, could this be a good thing that there is this kind of attention on the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think it is a good thing. And one thing I'd like to point out before I jump into that is I think that both the medical and or recreational, I don't like this word, but marijuana, for lack of a better term, marijuana industry and the hemp industry can coexist. There are two different markets. There are two different pathways. Consumers can have preferences towards both. They can both exist in a state. Absolutely. Now, silver lining. Yes. I think there's two main silver linings. Number one, how much more educated consumers are becoming, right? They're paying attention to, oh, wait, one of the things that kind of astonishes some of my customer base is when they come in and go, we tell them about our lab testing standards, full panel COAs, everything we do. They're like, wait, the whole industry is not like that? I'm like, no, you can buy whatever product from whatever source and put it on a shelf. Who knows what's in it? That's the truth. So I think the main silver lining is consumers are hearing about this in the news. They're seeing legislation. They're becoming more educated. They're making better choices in where they choose to shop, supporting the businesses that have imposed these regulations on themselves, which I think is great because those businesses then fund, the advocacy groups that keep these products legal and accessible. So that's a great unintended consequence. And then number two that I think is a surprising, but not at the same time, it has also caused some of the larger entities to look at the hemp industry more legitimately, right? You're seeing, like in the beverage space, you're seeing some of the alcohol distributors, some of the alcohol manufacturers, some of the bigger corporations look at this and go, wait, this is actually a viable market. How big is that market share right now? They see this legislation coming in, and they're willing to make investments. Like, I don't know if you've seen it, but Edible Arrangements is actually opening an edible delivery
Yep.
portion of their business, and I think they're opening one. I know it's in Atlanta. Maybe it's by Grant Park. Yeah, they're opening an edible delivery business in Atlanta. So when you start seeing things like that, it's great for the industry because that's even more protection, right? One of the things, the hemp industry has always been mainly small businesses, and it's eventually going to get to bigger businesses. But once it does, and as we see these investments happen, these corporations want to protect their money. They protect the industry. That makes our job fighting for the industry just that much easier.
No, for sure. Very well said. So to shift back to you guys, so tell us about Nine Dot, the creation of the brand. Obviously, as we were discussing, a lot has changed, and the whole beverage side has really exploded. So tell us about Nine Dot and the current portfolio of what you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started early on in Coastal Green because in Coastal Green we were just a retail storefront. We were, vetting the brands heavily. I think when I opened, looking back, it's adorable to see the 3 brands I had on my counter in my cabinets. And now we probably carry about 12, 15. We're still really selective. We make sure we know where the products are coming from. We screen them independently for additional lab testing, all that. I like to have a very hands-on relationship with them as well. But we developed Coastal Green CBD early on as our CBD focus line to maintain consistency. Number one, make sure that product is the exact same thing month in, month out. A little bit better pricing, just quality control, all of the above. Then we expanded into Dankadence, which is our THC focus line. So that's our THC gummies. We do a little bit of Delta 8 vapes, some other vapes, a little flower. Not in Georgia, though, of course, because that is banned. And then under the Dankadence brand, actually, because Nine Dot was launched about little less than a year ago, but we've been working on the R&D and the emulsion side of our beverage for the 2 years, 2.5 years, 2 years and a quarter.
Wow.
Under the Dankadence brand, we had like a concentrate. We called it an elixir, a 3-ounce bottle with multiple servings. For lack of a better comparison, think about it like a mini bottle of liqueur. You take that with you, you make your own cannabis beverage on the spot. So that's the product that we've used to dial in our emulsion, flavor profiles, make sure that we stay water soluble because it's water miscible, water soluble. A lot of stuff floats to the bottom. Making sure that our onset time is actually what we say it is and is very consistent. We also use completely naturally occurring THC. But as we had the elixir, and as I saw a few beverage brands start to pop up, really gain some traction, I think the biggest kind of perception shift for myself was seeing how mainstream it got quickly, right? I early on in the CBD industry was knocking on chiropractic doors, trying to get into Walgreens. Like I went down all of these mainstream avenues, and it was no, 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 no. No big chain, no one, anyone. I think Walgreens did end up picking something up, but it was an isolate-based topical. They were so conservative from the more mainstream channels that it was eye-opening to see some of these or some big retailers kind of shift their perception and pick these products up. The Minnesota market started out really early on. Tennessee market started out really early on with these beverages. And that's when we made the internal decision, hey, it's probably the good game plan to start developing our own beverage brand. Worked on that for probably 6 to 8 months to get all the branding down, work on flavor profiles, etc. And then about a year, give or take, just kind of hit the ground running with it.
Yeah. So in addition to just a crazy amount of new players obviously coming into the space, there's obviously a lot of talk around things like dosage, and you mentioned elixirs, which is interesting to me. I mean, there's no real alcohol equivalent to where you could bring your own little tiny bottle and turn anything into, a beverage like you can with THC now. And so just curious how you see that whole thing evolving, both from a dosage side and just how people are using it in beverages.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the dosage conversation is another one I could bring on industry experts, PhDs. We could have a whole podcast dedicated to dosage and how variable it is consumer to consumer. But I think the key is education. Going back to how we built Coastal Green, education first and foremost, because as much as we make the comparisons between THC and alcohol, and I firmly believe THC is safer, THC can be a lot more potent in a smaller setting. Plus, THC can still taste really good in a high potency. No one wants to chug Everclear. Does not taste good. Uh, but you can have a very high potency THC beverage product or even gummy product that does not taste bad necessarily. So it can potentially be a little confusing to consumers. And again, one of the reasons I do support serving size limits, especially in the bar type atmosphere, I think you need to be a little bit more conservative there. I think a lot of consumers know that they can handle a 20, 30, 40 milligram, 50 milligram or higher single dosage, but a lot of consumers don't. A lot of consumers will see a can, let's say it has 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 milligrams, which is too much in a beverage for most people, but they don't really understand what that is. I think some consumers do now, but there's a huge difference between a 5 milligram and a 50 milligram serving. And again, a lot of consumers don't know. And without getting too much into the science, I'll mention it very briefly. Generally speaking, there's an enzyme in your liver that digests delta 9 THC, specifically normal THC. And just genetically, some people have a lot of the enzyme, some people are missing the enzyme. So in comparison to alcohol, again, body weight plays a big role. Not the case for cannabis. It's actually a genetically based factor that can make some people really, really sensitive to the effects of THC. And some people who have never consumed cannabis ever could need 50 milligrams of a gummy to get a moderate effect. And it's just based on genetics. Now, with a good quality beverage, it is possible to level the playing field a little bit. You can use a variety of different emulsifiers and processes and nano emulsification. There's a lot of terms thrown out there right now. But a good quality beverage can allow the cannabinoids to pass in your stomach lining, not be metabolized by your liver. So one, it makes it a lot more consistent consumer to consumer. That big variability gap kind of goes out the window. Number two, it can create a lot quicker of an onset. Doesn't necessarily mean intense. It just means it delivers into the system a lot more rapidly. And then three, it can also shorten the duration of the effects. One thing I hear a lot with edibles is, it lasted too long, because edibles have a half-life that can extend up to 4, 5, 6, 7 hours for some people. That's a big commitment. Not necessarily great for social settings. Then you compare that to a good quality beverage, should be more like the 2 to 3 hour range.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting information. I mean, for myself, I feel like I'm pretty well versed in a lot of this stuff, but I learned some things just from what you had to say, from an absorption perspective, is really interesting and obviously important for consumers to know.
Yeah. And last thing I'll end dosaging on, sorry to interrupt, but I do just want to make sure to include one thing, because we always say it in store: start low, go slow. Remember the delayed onset. You should, if it's your very first time, particularly with gummies are a little bit more worrying, or again, going back to that liver enzyme variability than beverages should be. But generally speaking, my opinion is a little different than some. You should start extra conservative. Go with 2.5, 3, maybe 5 milligrams for your very first experience. Because if you notice too little or it's not enough, you can just eat more next time. And also the golden rule is you can always eat more, you can never eat less, right? That is the edible rule. And gummies can take up to 2 or 3 hours for the effects to start. Add on another hour or two for full peak effects. So the number one mistake people make is gummy beverage. They eat, drink one, they don't feel it. 30 minutes later, they eat another one. They don't feel it. They eat another one. And then, you can get some anxiety and some of the downsides or potential small side effects of THC. Drastically safer than a lot of other, even over-the-counter stuff. You compare it to Tylenol, but you still need to treat it with respect. It is still an intoxicant. Start low, go slow.
No, for sure. It's a good mantra. So last question I have for you, what's on the horizon for both 9 and Coastal Green? What's ahead for you guys? And obviously the regulatory landscape, I'm sure, may have some impact on that, as we talked about, but what are you guys focused on?
Yeah, so still really focused with the nonprofit and making sure that this legislation, doesn't catch us off guard again. We are looking at expanding our retail footprint with Coastal Green, and then last part, what I'm really focused on right now is building up Nine Dot. We have a good foothold in the Atlanta market, but I'm positioning Nine Dot to be Atlanta's cannabis beverage brand. That's the main goal here. We want every person in Atlanta to try Nine Dot, experience it, and get on board with it because I know they're gonna love it. We have new flavors in development right now. We are making some packaging changes because the regulations changed a little bit again, so we are complying completely with Georgia regulations. So our whole footprint is based on that outwards. But yeah, just keep it going mainstream. Really excited that the liquor stores are allowed to start selling these products. That's going to make the industry growth accelerate greatly. And yeah, just keep being in Atlanta, slinging Nine Dot.
All right. Well, exciting times ahead. And David, really appreciate you taking some time to sit down with us. And maybe in the future, we will dedicate an episode to some of those things that could have been their own episode. But for now, this was a great conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me. I think that this really does a lot for, again, just going back to making this industry mainstream. Having these conversations is one of my favorite things. I've done it in store for 8 years. Taking someone who may not be comfortable with cannabis or someone who is an avid consumer, industry expert, bringing all of these conversations together, just like you are right now on this podcast, is phenomenal for the industry. So thank you for that. Thanks for the opportunity, and look forward to chatting again soon.
All right. Sounds great.